Hi guys. This is Sally, Emily's cousin. And first of all, let me say I'm so sorry that I'm not able to do this live tonight. Instead, I'm just doing it about 4 hours in advance. Stuff just came up today and it got nuts here this afternoon, and we're trying to get out the door early tomorrow morning. Anyway, this is not my usual MO. I'm so sorry about this. I owe you guys one. If you ever want to do this again, please let me know. If you need help getting other wines or anything like that, let me know. It took a little while to get you your wines this time, and I think it was just because all the COVID stuff and customs was a little backed up and things like that. So I probably would wait a little while, a few weeks, maybe a few months to order from Italy again, but I plan on doing so myself probably around September, just temperature wise and things like that. So sorry I can't do this live with you tonight, but I appreciate you guys even doing this. I think it's super fun. It's a great idea. And I really, anytime you want to do it again, let me know because it would be my pleasure. I don't want you to have to look at me the whole time, so I did prep some slides, and I'm just going to share my screen as we talk about these. So let me do that. All right. So, I chose these two wines specifically because number one, I love them. I think they're wonderful. And two, they come from areas near Tuscany and that are very similar to Tuscany. So I think tourism wise, it's really interesting to talk about these regions because they're beautiful. They've got amazing towns, beaches, things to offer, wonderful wines, and they're not as expensive as Tuscany. So tourism wise, if you're looking really to get off the beaten path, these places are great. And then wine wise, they're really wonderful wines that only come from these two specific regions. Well, one of them kind of comes from another region too, but they're native to these regions and they're really made in small quantities, but really high quality. And they can be really hard to find in the US. So Pecorino is the white wine that comes from Le Marche, and Sagrantino di Montifalco comes from Umbria. So you have Le Marche pictured on the left with the green plain and then the hilltop town, and then Umbria is pictured on the right. So very much like what we think of when we think of Tuscany. Okay. So I want to start always with the white wine. You always kind of go lighter in alcohol to heavier in alcohol as you're drinking because alcohol can kind of equate to what you're feeling in your mouth. So you don't want to start with something really heavy and tannic and like 15% alcohol and then go to something that's like 11% alcohol because you're not really then tasting the 11% one completely. Anyway, so we'll start with the Pecorino, which is from a region called Le Marche. So it's known kind of as the elbow of Italy. And you have Tuscany to the west, Umbria, Abruzzo, Lazio, this is Rome down here, the capital, and then Emilia-Romagna to the north. So we're really talking about probably as the crow flies, this is probably, I don't know, 70, 80 miles. It's really not far. All of Italy can basically fit within the state of California, if you want to think about it that way. So that's not a terrible distance between these places, but very different wines. So Marche's capital city is actually the port town right on the elbow, and it's called Ancona. And a really important town that was actually settled by the Greeks. The Greeks settled Sicily, and then actually from Sicily went up around the boot and founded Ancona. Still a really important port town for Italy today. But just wanted to show you a little bit of the scenery there. So, I mean, just incredible little towns, not much tourism. So again, if you want to go get off the beaten path or just get lost for a while, it's a really great place to go. Now we're looking at the wine regions of Le Marche. So here you have Le Marche divided into its 5 provinces, which are named after the major towns in those areas. So this is named Pesaro Urbino as one province, and then Ancona is one province. So it's kind of split up geographically. And on the west, we have the Central Apennines, the mountain range that runs down the middle of all of Italy and all the way into Sicily, actually. And then we have kind of rolling hills right here in the middle. And then you just kind of have these cliffs that like drop off into the Adriatic Sea on the east. So it's a really pretty, you can see here, the different colors are the wine regions. So wine isn't made everywhere. Here it's a little too high of elevation, a little too cold to make wines. Same thing in this area. Here we get a little bit warmer as we get south. So even though it's in the mountains over here, it's warm enough to where they can actually grow grapes consistently in this area. But the most famous wine from Le Marche, which you might have heard of this, but I doubt it, is actually this one here. It's called Verdicchio di Castelli di Gessi. And it's a white wine that comes in dry to sweet. Most of them are dry. So it's a really refreshing white wine that if you can actually find one of those, I highly recommend doing so because they're really interesting. This area is known for red wines made from the Montepulciano grape. So, and actually, well, we'll get to that, I think, on the next slide. But where we are looking at for Pecorino is down in this area of Offida. So you see this orange area here in the southeast corner. We have Offida Pecorina. So that is a very specific wine region for this one grape called Pecorino or Pecorina. So here I just zoomed in on that basically. So we're looking at it down here. These are just the principal wine regions in kind of the central area around Ancona. Ancona is right here on this point. And then again, down here, we have Offida, which features the Passerina grape and the Pecorino grape. So 2 different wines from this area. So Pecorino is native to Southern Marche. It isn't found really anywhere else in Italy, or at least it wasn't until the late 1990s when they discovered that it does really well in that area. So they actually are growing it now just across the border to the south in Abruzzo as well. But you can see here on the wheel of grapes, they're not all listed here, but I can tell you Sangiovese, the main grape, the #1 grape in all of Italy is Sangiovese. And that's the base for Chianti, Brunello di Montalcino. A lot of wines that you've heard of and you see regularly from Italy are made from Sangiovese. And that is the #1 grape in Le Marche, although in Le Marche it's usually used in blends and things like that. Then we have the grape called Montepulciano, making up the next part. This one is Verdicchio di Castelli di Gessi, is the biggest white wine coming from that area. So you can see on the wheel of wine, or grapes rather, from Le Marche, Pecorino is just a pretty small share of that, but it's actually growing. So popularity-wise, people are seeing that it's a native grape that never got a lot of attention until now because it is producing just really consistently good wines, even though it's done in small amounts. So even in Italy, it can be hard to find a Pecorino. You don't see it on every menu. You're seeing it more and more on menus like in Florence or in Siena because they're kind of close to Le Marche. But even in Rome, it would be really hard to find a Pecorino bottle of wine like on a menu at a restaurant or in a wine shop. So that's one of the reasons I wanted you to try it today because it's so unique, but it's one of my favorites. Pretty much any time I do find it on a menu, Even if it's just like a little sandwich shop in Florence and I need just, you know, a little glass of wine to go with it, I'll always go for the Pecorino. So Pecorino the word itself comes from the word pecora for sheep. So the area where it's native to was always home to sheep herders, sheep farmers, sheep herders. And it's called Pecorino, the grape, because the sheep would graze the pastures and eat these grapes as they got ripe. So it doesn't really have anything to do with like the flavor of the wine being like Pecorino cheese. I think a lot of people associate that because you've probably heard of Pecorino cheese, which is sheep's cheese, and probably not of the wine. So people often think that the wine like is named after the cheese or something like that. Really, it just comes from the fact that the animals would eat the grapes as they graze. So, but of course, you know, it goes great with Pecorino cheese. If you're opening your bottle and need a perfect pairing, Pecorino cheese would be an outstanding pairing for that. So as you're drinking it and enjoying it, which I wish I could be doing with you right now, it was my full intention to do so. One of the things about Pecorino that people like so much is it has really good acidity. And acidity in a wine is just that that quality that kind of makes your mouth water. So high acidity things like champagne, other sparkling wines, usually good white wines are going to have good acidity, which is why we have them as appetizers or before other things, because they get your palate actually salivating and makes you ready for food. You want to eat with them. The other thing that acidity does in a wine is helps balance it out. So grapes that have a high sugar content means that that wine, when you make it, you're going to probably end up with a higher alcohol content because in fermentation, yeast changes sugar into alcohol. So the higher sugar you have in a grape, the higher potential alcohol you have in that wine. As much as that's, you know, great, it takes less to get you a little tipsy. In order for that wine to really be balanced and to live longer, you also want it to have good acidity. So not all white grapes have the potential for that sugar. So sometimes you get high acidity, but not high alcohol, not high sugar, and that wine really can't age, which is fine. A lot of wines are meant to just be enjoyed as soon as they're made, especially white wines for this reason. So, you know, I think people think like, you know, the longer you can age a wine, like the better it is and the more kind of chic it is. I don't think that's true at all. I mean, there are really wonderful wines that are produced with the specific intent for you to enjoy them as soon as possible, just because of the quality of those, or the character rather, of those grapes. So Pecorino is interesting for a white wine because it does have that high acidity and the high sugar. So it can actually age, if you wanted it to, in the bottle for several years and still be really good and develop some different flavors. So this wine I love because it is light and refreshing. That acidity is that refreshing quality too. But it's a light color. It's a straw yellow with really good floral aromas. So blossom, jasmine are kind of the, I guess, general ones. Of course, you can find different aromas in every different bottle. And then the acidity and freshness, a medium body, which again, for a white wine is kind of unique. You know, oftentimes you find a light body. And again, that goes back to the sugar and the alcohol. And it's refreshing, but it also has some savory characteristics. So you might even be able, like, reminded a little bit of like a creaminess of like a cheese or something like that. even some plant and vegetation type flavors, maybe some herbs and things like that. So it has a lot of character for a really inexpensive, just kind of nice, like everyday type of wine. Um, at this point, if I were with you live, we would stop and talk about what you're tasting, maybe ask some questions, things like that. If you have questions, feel free to text me and I will try to get back with you ASAP. Oh, I'm so sorry. Okay, so that is your white wine Pecorino. I'm trying to think if there's anything else I wanted to touch on. The other one, actually, this is kind of a cute little story. So the other grape from that area in Southern Market, Passerina, is locally known as paga debito, or debt payment, because it, unlike Pecorino, it does kind of produce more of like a flat, um, quite a bit younger. Like you definitely want to drink it right away because it's not going to live very long, like in the bottle or age or anything like that. And it's pretty abundant. It's a hardy grape, so it's easy to grow. So farmers would make a lot of that wine, in their homes and things like that, and they would use it to pay off their debts to other people. So Passerina, this other grape, is known also locally as paga debito, or debt payment, which I think is kind of funny. Yeah, so visit Le Marque, get some Pecorino in person and some cheese, Okay, so I'm gonna go to the red wine, which is Sagrantino di Montefalco. And it comes from Umbria. So Umbria is this region between Toscana and Le Marche. You've probably heard of Umbria before. You've heard of Perugia, where Amanda Knox went to school. Assisi is here, Orvieto. So you've probably heard of it. It's unique because it's the only region in central and southern Italy that's landlocked. The only other regions that are landlocked are up here in the Alps, and really only like 4 of them. And it's the 5th smallest region in Italy. And it's kind of a little brother to Tuscany overall. Like tourism there is pretty strong, I will say. There are quite a few tourists there, quite a few expats that live there and things like that, but definitely not as much as Tuscany. Definitely room to explore Umbria more and still get off the beaten path. This at the bottom is Assisi, San Francesco. So St. Francis of Assisi. So this is the Abbey and the church, which to me is the most beautiful church in the world that I've ever been to, at least. And definitely worth a visit. This color, this rosy color of the town, is somehow always present. Like the towns are not that color. It's somehow the sunset and the clouds and the light. Like it is just a stunning little town. You can walk across it in an hour, and under an hour, and just bebop in shops the whole way. But a lot of towns are like that, like small and kind of undiscovered. So definitely a lovely place to visit. So here again in Umbria, Sangiovese is still the most grown grape, but it's really makes the most popular wines up in this area. Umbria historically was a white wine region, and the wines from there, this is the Tiber River right here that runs all the way through Umbria and straight down to the middle of Rome. So the white wines of Umbria in the Roman times were really popular because they were very good, and you could get them down to Rome very easily on the river. And a lot of times, actually, wines that the Romans preferred were sweet. So the Greeks and the Romans preferred sweet wine. So most wine before the 1800s was actually more sweet than it is dry. Whereas today, most are dry. The white that we have today is dry. And I do want to specify, so dry means that there's not residual sugar. So sometimes I think people confuse floral flavors or fruity flavors with the wine actually being sweet. But that's a common misconception. The white wine, if you go back to it, I don't know if anyone perceived it as sweet, but it is in fact not sweet. It is dry, but it does have some pretty fruity flavors. So anyway, yeah, so the most popular wine actually from Umbria overall comes from this area around Orvieto. And Orvieto, right here in the heart of kind of the southwest corner, is a beautiful hilltop town with a really rich Etruscan heritage of winemaking. And the Etruscans were the native people who actually predate the Romans. And this town of Orvieto has these beautiful wine caves built into the ground there where the Etruscans would actually make their white wines. But the wines there are made mostly from these white grapes, Trebbiano Toscano and Grechetto. And they make some really lovely, lovely wines that are on par with Pecorino, in my opinion. But what we're looking at today is this area right here in the hot pink. It's a town called Montefalco, and the grape is called Sagrantino. So the wine is called Sagrantino di Montefalco. And, oh, there it is. I was like, it's not even on here. It is. So you can see that it fills its fair share of the grapes that are grown in Umbria, but it's still quite small compared to some of the others. And it really is pretty much concentrated right here in this little area. So thinking about the scale of everything, you know, this is maybe like a 30 to 40 mile circle or area of land there. It's really not much. But it is one of their native grapes. So this is the town of Montefalco itself. You can see it's a medieval fortress town, and the area is all around it. It's up on a hill, kind of in this valley, and this is looking east. So you see the sunset is like behind us, and looking east to the central Apennine mountain range. So Sagrantino, especially back in the time of the Romans, it's a really thick-skinned grape. So that means a lot of the flavor and color in wines, most of it, all of it, comes from the skins. And the Romans loved these sweet wines, especially wines that were made to be extra, extra sweet through the process of appassimento. And this process is where they would take super ripe grapes. So normally when you take a grape to go into fermentation and make your wine, they would take it, let it like hang dry or dry on mats in the sun so that the water evaporated from the fruit and concentrated the sugars even more before they started fermentation. And what that does is makes it so that during fermentation, the yeast cannot compete with the amount of sugar in there. And at some point, fermentation will just stop. So you'll get a high percentage of alcohol, but then you also get a high remainder of sugar, making your wine extra sweet. So it's a really common method for dessert wines and things like that. But it was traditional. It was kind of the way that the Romans preferred to make their wines. So also makes really full-bodied and powerful wines that are deep in color and with really intense flavors and aromas. Particularly in this wine, cherry to me was the biggest one. I had the bottle that you have a few weeks ago and I destroyed it. It was so good. I mean, I love this bottle. Cherry in particular, but also blackberry and plum are typical flavors. And then you can feel the tannin. So the tannin is that feeling of when the wine is in your mouth, it kind of makes your tongue like dry a little bit or like prickly. We used to say on the wine tour, my boss in Florence would say, it's like when you take a walnut and put it on your tongue and it has that like kind of prickly sensation, that's tannin. So this wine is quite tannic, and really likes to be served with food. And some of the best food from Umbria and this area are mushrooms and truffles. They're known for their white truffles. But so the dry style, and dry style just means like a normal red wine, like the one we have. It means not made to be extra sweet, like the Appassimento ones. So the dry versions of Sagrantino must be aged for a minimum of 37 months. So very specific. 12 of those have to be in oak, and at least 4 of those have to be in the bottle. And they do this because they do this to protect the like original character of the wines. And what it does in the oak helps smooth tannins because it's so tannic, this grape. It has to spend time in oak to kind of round out a little bit and smooth those out. And the aging in bottle actually helps that too. So the wines have to be at least 13% alcohol. Basically, that's just saying, we know there's X amount of sugar in these grapes. So we know that if made properly, it's going to reach at least 13% alcohol. Mostly, they're usually between 14 and 15% though, because they have so much sugar, so much sugar that produces so much alcohol. So again, tannin, acid, and that full body and alcohol all work together to help a wine age and its aging potential. So that's why red wines are more ageable, because the compounds in the tannins and in the skins protect the wine over time and allow them to age more than a white wine does, if that makes sense. Oh, that's it? God, that went so fast. Now what? I want to open my bottle, but I've got so much to do. Okay, so I'm so sorry I'm not there live to talk about this more, answer questions. I hope that you're all getting tipsy by now and enjoying your bottles. Please, please, please do this again and let me know. And yeah, I'm just so sorry. Anyway, I hope you guys have a wonderful evening. Enjoy each other's company. Stay safe and much love and cheers.